disconnect.
Good morning, good
I
afternoon,
think it's
good evening, good night. We're back again today for a special day, I guess. A little bit different. Yesterday we were on stream with Layla doing Blazor in WebAssembly with Azure AD and B2C, which was a ton of fun. So we had to bump our community hours this week over to now. So we're here. And we've got some news. We've got a guest, and we're going to take a look at some community code today. So Christos, what's happened this week?
Morning,
Morning, everyone,
and afternoon,
afternoon,
wherever you are.
It's all good, man.
It's all good, man.
Last day of the
Last
week.
day of the
And
week.
it feels like
And
it's
it
been a
feels like it's been a very long week.
Oh no, it has. It's just like
And I had what was it, like Tuesday off?
Tuesday
So
off,
it just
so
messed
it just
everything
messed
up.
everything up. So
I thought Wednesday was a Monday, and everything just went back, and it felt like a non-ending week. But hey, we made it to the end of the week, so it's great to be here. We have some great news for our readers and from the community out there. So first of all, we announced MSAL.js 2.0, which is now in general availability, which is fantastic. That means that you get Pixie, you don't have to use implicit flow anymore, and it should make writing single page apps with JavaScript so much easier when it comes to authenticating against Azure AD. But you did mention something about B2C, right?
yeah.
JP?
So MSAL.js 2 is out, so you can use authorization code flow in JavaScript apps, which is a big deal. That's what uses Pixie and gets us away from requiring implicit in JavaScript apps. But at least as of right now, per the repository on GitHub for that library, it does not yet support B2C, but that's on the way. So if you're using B2C, you've still got to use the old one for now, but 2.0 will be ready for B2C soon.
Very, very soon. So hold on tight. Don't go anywhere. Next one, it's from R. Zorman. This is about Azure AD and external identities and advanced flow. This is how to use, in effect, external identities and do some magic with logic apps and flow if you want to have some kind of a process that once somebody joins with external identity, you can send an email or you can set something up. So there's a nice flow here. You can follow the example. You don't have to follow this exact guide, but it just shows you how you can tap into the process and then do some automation on the back of that, which is great. I also came across this blog post, which shows that there is a possibility to abuse Azure AD SSO with primary refresh tokens if you're not careful. It goes through all the possibilities of how somebody can mount an attack and how they can abuse SSO, but it also comes with a nice mitigation process at the bottom and how you can protect against these kinds of attacks. So I would definitely give that a read as well. We'll share the links later on. Yesterday we came across Rob Windsor, who actually did a couple of streams around Azure AD app registration and authentication, which is great. So if you want to know what the steps are or how to set it up, starting from scratch, if you've never done this before, then make sure you give Rob Windsor a follow and check his streams from yesterday. Really good stuff. The next one is a Terraform task, which actually creates an Azure AD app registration for your apps, and then it stores the secrets into Azure Key Vault. So win-win, right? Super secure. You can grab this from GitHub and then give it a go if you want to automate the deployment of app registrations as part of your CI/CD.
Well, and I got a buddy of mine. He has the greatest name on earth, by the way, because his last name is Hacker. But I got a buddy who does a bunch of Azure AD work. In fact, he used to work in the PG, and he and I worked together for a few years before I came over here. And he, this was the number one thing that he asked for was a way to automate app registrations. Like he wants them in ARM, like in an ARM template,
Yes.
but Terraform is at least available now, and because of those APIs that came out over a month ago, 6 weeks ago with Build, now you can create these. You can automatically create these, which is awesome, and do them as part of like a CI/CD script, or if you're doing automated testing or whatever. And we know that's been a big ask for a long time, so it's awesome that they're here.
Yes, and I have to give a shout out to my buddy Laurent Leslie, we worked together when he was a CSA and I was in the UK. This guy is awesome. This is the only person I saw actually writing ARM templates by heart.
Oh, see,
And
that's
he put like this kind of a 17 VM kind of a setup with disks and backups and what have you, all writing ARM. And I was uh, you know, writing the templates, and I was mesmerized by his JSON skills. So this guy is insane, and his name is on this project, so I can guarantee that this is gonna be working end to end, no problem. Next, we have securing a Blazor WebAssembly application with Azure Active Directory. There's a very nice blog post by Walkdo. He's a PFE for Microsoft, and they show us how you can actually use Azure AD to secure your Blazor WebAssembly. Funny enough, we did a stream yesterday with our very good friend Lara Cote on stream for 3 hours, where we actually showed something very similar. We did Blazor WebAssembly with Azure B2C. So it was slightly different, but it follows the exact same principles as this one as well. So if you want to secure your WebAssembly apps with Azure AD or B2C, then make sure you have a look over here. We also want to let people know that there will be new templates dropping into Visual Studio and the CLI very, very soon. So there will be much better integration with the latest libraries in the coming weeks. We will definitely talk about that as soon as they are available, but it should make the interaction between or integration between Blazor and Azure AD or B2C much, much smoother and straightforward, whether you're using an IDE or the CLI. And finally, I have this blog post by Chun Lin, which talks about how you can authenticate Azure functions with Azure Active Directory using the Easy Auth option. So in this blog post, she explains how you deploy your function. In this case, she's using an HTTP trigger, and then she's using the Easy Auth to go and authenticate, and Postman to test the functionality. And you see there's not much code here, but all the way at the bottom, she does have and if you want to grab the claims from your tokens, then inside your function you can run this code, which is great. I want to thank everyone for putting this out there, and if you have anything that you've written or done recently and you want us to give it out, then make sure you reach out to us. And that's me with the community news.
Well, so the thing on functions with EasyAuth, that's an interesting one because, of course, EasyAuth's been around forever in app service. And I remember when Functions V1 was out, you'd connect EasyAuth and hook it up, and your claims principal would be available, and everything would sort of just work, right?
Yes.
But then we got to V2, and that no longer worked. Like EasyAuth would work, and you could get the tokens out of the headers, but you were responsible for building that claims principal yourself. Because I noticed that at the bottom of this post, we've got a principal object, which I'm assuming that's got some code in there to do that mapping, which is cool. But it is it's kind of like what we did yesterday, right? Which was you do half an hour of configuration and you write one line of code.
It's setting up the foundation. Once you do the foundation, everything else is easier. And it's nice to not have to write too much code when it comes to authenticating and getting claims and what have you, because you want to focus on the task at hand, which is usually do the authentication quickly and securely, and then move on to write some awesome UIs or some server-side code.
Yeah.
Yep.
Super cool, though.
Yes.
All right, cool. What's next?
Well, next we have my very good friend Kunal, all the way from Edinburgh in the UK. Kunal,
Hi, Christos.
Hey man, how are you? It's been a long time.
Thanks. How are you?
We're good. Like we used to work together when I was back in the UK as a PFE, and Kunal was an ADM, an application developer manager. What are you doing these days, Kunal?
I work as a cloud solution architect, so helping our customers, with Azure.
Yes, and in fact, you reached out to me this week with a funky Azure thing. So Azure functions these days seems to be like on the spotlight. Everyone's doing functions, which is great. But it comes with its challenges like authentication and stuff like that, right?
Absolutely. And the customer was looking for, to use a managed service identity. Was one of the things they were trying to do, which is pretty cool thing. I like that. So you could you don't have to pass in keys and things like that. So they wanted to access storage account from function using MSIs.
Right.
And this is where we had some challenges, and I think we had a very good discussion, and we came across some solution. So
Well, we came across two things. Like we found a bug, which was a bit annoying. Then we found a workaround for the existing solution, and then we found a way to do it going forward, right? So there are three things that we need to mention here. Do you want to take us through the process?
sure, if you want, I can share my screen as well. That's
Yeah, man. Let's do this.
let's do it.
I'll stop
I
sharing
might
mine.
have to deploy it fresh. So should I share?
Fresh deployment. I like it.
So
Nothing like a fresh deployment on a Friday morning.
you can see a big Azure globe, right? All right.
Yeah.
So let's look at the scenario, right? What we were
Yep.
trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we were actually trying to create a function. So I have just deployed a fresh function, just
Right.
to save us time. And what we wanted to do was, hey, whenever the function is triggered, I want to do something with blob storage. I want to might be copy file in there or do something. And I don't want to provide any connection strings to the blob storage. So we said, okay, hey, that's a good idea. So let's do identity. And we looked at, we can use system assign identity, which is pretty good, and it has the same life cycle as your function. But we preferred using user assigned identity because the same identity could be used across different things in our applications.
Right.
So,
Hey, Kunal, can you zoom in a little bit because I've got old
sure.
eyes?
What I will
Just not
do is
from my line.
actually, I got a very big resolution, so I'm just going to change it.
Yes, I have the same problem. Do you have a widescreen?
I got like a 40-inch monitor there, so
Look at you.
that could be a problem. Let me just scale it right down. 10.
There should be a right-click, adjust resolution for streaming. This should be.
Yeah, I think that would be pretty cool. Okay, so this should work. This will make everything big for me, but that's okay. Is it better? Is it any better?
This is definitely better. Yeah, I think if you zoom in like one time on the browser, it should be even better. Like
This is
110 or 120.
All right, let's do that. 110.
120. Perfect.
Excellent. So let's have a look. So said okay, we'll go and assign a user created identity, and to create that, we just said okay, let's run the command, simple command to create it. So we'll do it just now.
Yep.
Do you remember the command by heart?
You mean Azure account create
SP.
yeah. No, well, you don't need an SP. I think you can do both, but you can create an SP if you want to.
Sure. So I'm just going to use quick search. I think it was easy SP. Was it easy SP or?
It was just 1,557 possibilities.
Yes, that's what we want. No, please go away. Doesn't like that. It's not wanting to go away. That's all right. We will do it quickly. It was called FUMS MSI. Yep, it doesn't want to remember. That's all right. This is where I use our friend, right? So
that's what we all do, my friend. Don't worry about it.
So CLI. I will just pick up the first command in there. Yep, this is the one. Right. I think there is one with a group. That's okay. We can use this for now.
Yep.
Okay. And we will call this from demo, right? So we just created an MSI here. Let's go and assign it. So just a service principal, I'm going to go and assign it here. So
yeah, because just creating it doesn't really do anything. We need to actually go and create one, right?
Exactly.
Assign it to the resources that we need to use.
Function Might need a refresh. Give me one tick.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, hopefully we can see it. Function.
You were in the right resource group, right? It's a subscription, right?
That might be a problem. So I got a same MSI created beforehand, same identity. So I'm going to use this service principal.
Let's use that one.
MSI, yeah. And TrustMate is the same thing. It's just created beforehand. And I'm going to go and assign it here.
Mm-hmm.
So that then allows me to use that, service principal to make calls to storage blob and things like that. So what we did after that was we said, hey, okay, that's fine. Let's go and assign permissions to this. So I'm going to go to my blob. I was using a storage account.
Yeah, so those permissions are the built-in RBAC permissions. And the nice thing about that is that by creating and assigning permissions, we have a lockdown account that can only do certain things.
That's correct. So we just went here and said, hey, okay, we need to give access to that service principal. So we said, okay, let's do that from here.
Yep.
And I think we already got that assigned for this one. So if I look at the role assignments,
okay,
I should see. Yep, we can see a lot of them assigned. I think we were getting a bit carried away, so we tried to assign every permission possible. But essentially, you need I think this storage blob data owner kind of permission.
I think you can do contributor because the contributor as well allows you to read write and manage the blobs. But however, if your function only needs to read stuff from the blob, then that should be a storage account blob reader, which locks down the permissions. So again, you need to find the right permission for your purpose.
Yep, and there are out-of-box permissions here, so I'm just going to list them for storage, and we can see all the storage blob reader, other permissions.
Yep.
Which was great. So we just went and assigned and said, okay, let's do that. And now the question was, hey, how do we then start using this into our functions? So if I go back to and this is where I think we started facing some challenges, right?
Well, we had an issue because we were using functions 3.0, right? The latest one, using .NET Core. And we were trying to write a method that would authenticate the function against Azure AD, because that's what you do with user-assigned identities. And then grabbing the token and passing it to our storage client, so it can go and communicate with storage without really having any user interaction or without really having to pass any secrets. However, surprise, surprise, the code was not working for 3.0. It was asking for the app key. And Kunal was like, but why do I need an app key? The whole point of using MSI is that I don't have to explicitly add an app key or a secret to my connection string. And he was absolutely right. I was like,
this is where I called my mate in identity. I said, hey, Christos, what is this? This is not working, So this is where we had fun investigation. So I'm going to quickly bring up Visual Studio. And there was another thing, actually, interestingly, we found a strange bug, actually, Christos, which was if you publish the function.
Zoom in a little bit for me.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Zoom in a little bit. I'll zoom in here.
Yes.
We'll go to the code in a minute. This is a bit just a sample. So one of the interesting thing we found was if I publish the code from VS Code,
yep,
we had an issue, and if we publish the same code from Visual Studio, the issue suddenly disappeared. So I think there was something else happening which we need to investigate. So let's go back here. This is probably using an older version of library, Christos. I will come back to the newer version.
Yes, we will come back to the newer version, correct.
Yep. And I got this simple function here, which essentially goes and says, hey, run this function. This is a trigger, HTTP triggered function. And it goes and tries to access the storage account.
Yep.
Uses this user identity. So it's called manage identity ID. If we look at this one.
This managed identity GUID matches the one you created earlier on, that name that we saw that we're assigning the permissions to, right?
That's correct. So if I go back to my function MSI demo, I should see that MSI with the same ID.
Sweet. Just for people that they can follow up on what we're doing.
Yep. So if I go here, the way we captured that was we went into the service principal and we captured this GUID. So
yes.
I'm going to copy this again. Right, that's a client ID.
Yep.
And that's should be exactly same, but let's replace it
Mhm.
for.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the ID we are using. Now this is an older way of doing it, and I think Christos had some cool fancy libraries update which we could use to even not pass some of these pieces. So
Correct.
here we specified connection string, and this is where we were getting issues. So when we were trying to fix this,
Yep.
it was forcing us to say, hey, you need an app key.
Yes.
And so let's try and publish this function. Give me one tick. My TV has suddenly decided to, turn it off. Okay.
We can still see the code, by the way. So
not doing much for a long time, it seems like. Okay, so let's go and publish this. And what it's doing is it says, execute this, get the connection string. We are not passing any secrets here. We're saying just use this identity
yes.
and then connect to the story account. So
Okay.
if I publish this from here, so let's do publish.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen, and we're publishing live while we're doing the demo, just to show you that it all works.
Yeah. So I'm going to create a new profile because we got a new function, right? Azure.
Hey, it wouldn't be a day of Visual Studio if you didn't have to re-authenticate 38 times.
Yeah, Visual Studio, we need to improve a little bit on that one.
Yeah. It does. I think these days it's happening a bit more. I don't know what's the reason there, but it might be just system saying, hey, you need to reboot. So let me just quickly punch in the code. It should be good.
Look at that, two-factor authentication, making sure that nobody can mess up with your account. Hope everyone is using two-factor authentication out there.
Yeah. And it's still coming back. So let me see, just make sure it's not something silly I'm doing here.
And while Kunal is trying to fix that, we were freaking out yesterday because I saw some charges from Apple on our bank account. I was like, oh man, our account was hacked, and I was freaking out. So I checked mine. I called Apple and was like, hey, I see these charges. I don't recognize them. My wife couldn't remember. I was like, and the guy's like, yeah, we can see the charges, but they're not on your account. But no, so they said, we can't see the charges. And they said, are you using another Apple ID? I said, well, my wife has an Apple ID. Maybe it's her account. So they confirmed that the charges were against that account, but they couldn't say for what they were and what have you. So I was like, okay, fine. This is my wife. I think your account was hacked because my wife has a little bit of a story of not using secure passwords in the past and reusing passwords. And I was like, oh man, you probably have some insecure password they use somewhere else, and it will go hacked. And then I checked her Apple ID and I saw she had two-factor authentication. So a major relief. Oh yeah, I was like, yeah, nobody could have actually hacked your account or used your Apple ID because it's two-factor authentication. So we're good there. So now we need to just figure out where the charges were. And I was able to track them back. Apparently, if you're using Skype to make overseas calls, you can have an automatic top-up when your account runs out. And it turns out that she's associated her Skype with her Apple ID, and she recharged a couple of times, and the charges came back to back very, very quickly. I was like, oh,
I see.
that explains it. Like,
Yeah, I thought it was kids. If you give your Apple device to kids, then that could happen as well.
Well, we're still trying to get used to the fact that the tax is always added after the fact. So she remembered that she was topping up, so it was $9.99 for her top up, but the charges showed us $10.99 because there was the added tax, and she couldn't remember anything that she bought for $10.99. She's like, I don't remember these charges. And I said, it's $9.99 plus tax. Like, oh yeah, that was Skype. It's like, oh god,
I see.
that was an hour of my life lost for no reason, but it's fine.
Seems like I'm having fun with this sign-in. So it keeps
Is it
asking me
still
to
not
sign
working?
in. So I have another ways, but let's have a last chance here. Otherwise, I will switch this.
So it doesn't recognize your Azure account now?
Yep. So if I say new profile, Azure.
Yep.
Yep, that's what I want to do.
DJP, Kunal pronounce it Azure, not Azure.
That's okay, as long as it's not Azure.
Oh dear.
That's okay. I mean,
Well, we have
I've been here before.
What's the right one?
A lot of what happens.
there's
is,
no right or wrong. As long as it's not
Right.
Azure, we're okay.
a lot of what seems to happen is that for every account or for every tenant that your account is a guest in, so you've got your main tenant that you're a member of, and then customer or somebody's added you to other tenants. Every one of those, when you try to sign in with Visual Studio, it will pop a window for every single one. So it's trying to sign you in first into the corp tenant, then it's going to sign you into guest number 1, guest number 2, all the different guests, all the different tenants that you're a member of. It goes and tries to sign you into each one. So that's why you'll get the same window to sign in like 18 times if you're a member of 18 tenants. And it's just kind of a mess. It's not a very good. It's not a very good experience.
We need to improve that story.
Because I've been here thousands of times before. It ends up being easier just to do it from a CLI.
Yep.
Oh, you got a different subscription.
Yeah, I had too many subscriptions. That was one of my problems. If you look at this,
yes.
That's joys of when you add yourself into demo environments. That gives you lots of subscriptions. Let's see. It keeps switching back. So, all right. So we will go to our VS Code. Might be that is the thing we need to do. So let's go back and open this project in VS Code. How are we doing with time, guys?
Oh, you're fine.
We're good with time. Yeah. No pressure there.
Yeah. This is fun. Okay.
And of course, the big advantage to doing this is if you're not familiar with Azure Storage is, for Azure Storage is one of the oldest products in Azure. It's been around for a decade now. And until probably the last couple of years, if you were using storage, you had just a long key, right? You had a key that you would use, just a static string.
Yes.
Or you would, or you could generate like a shared access token, which was, a time limited or function limited, string or authentication string. And now you can use Azure AD and Service Principals to go and connect to that, which makes it much easier to sort of manage permissions to that faster, and without having to share a bunch of keys, because then you end up putting the key in Key Vault or something, and then you've got to go connect to Key Vault somehow. So you just sort of keep pushing the egg down the road, right? And with Managed Service Identity, now you don't need to maintain the credentials of the Service Principal either. And so instead of having to go through the couple extra hoops of going to Key Vault to get a key, or going to Key Vault to get some other like credential to then connect to storage, instead we can connect to storage directly as a Service Principal and rely on Managed Service Identity to own and rotate that credential for us.
Yep. Interestingly, I'm having trouble connecting to
to Azure.
Which is interesting. So it might be just my machine, which needs a reboot. That's the challenge there.
Yes, it's fine. So this is the code that was not working before, right?
Exactly. And this was, what we found was, if we published this from the VS Code, it was not working. The reason I wanted to show you that from Visual Studio was it was working from Visual Studio for some reason.
But that was the
better version.
The other thing that, right, was the if you were targeting the version of functions, right?
Yeah.
Something as well. So I wonder if Visual Studio targets the older version and whether VS Code targets the newer version. And hence... I
think that might be the reason, it seems like.
Although that is configurable via the functions, so it's like an app settings, if I remember correctly, in the files, or a function.json, which, I think there's a file. And by the way, you are using the CSX format, not the precompiled functions. So that's the other thing as well. There are when you do .NET, you can have two options. One is the CSX file, which is not compiling. It just runs .NET on the browser in effect. And then there's the precompiled one where you can have classes. It actually it has a CSprods file. Or a funcprods file, if I remember correctly. In effect, you have a compiled code that you upload into Azure. When you create that in Visual Studio, in fact, when you create a functions project in Visual Studio, it will create that. It will create a precompiled version. And you can decide which version of the runtime of the functions.NET runtime you want to target as well, or the function runtime in effect.
I see.
And
So is it-
yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. Nothing. So is it like runtime 3, or what's the latest runtime for the function? So I can see now.
Right now, the latest runtime is 3, so you can target that one. And I think that's the one that doesn't work with the current code version. And I think that was one of the problems. But it doesn't really matter that much anymore, especially with this version of the code, because many things have changed and will be changing with regards to the Azure SDKs and MSI. We'll be probably doing a much longer segment. We might even have John Gallant from the Azure SDKs team to come and talk to us about what is changing. But maybe what we can show while this is deploying is there you go. It's running the deployment now. We can see it.
It's running deployment now, and this is going to fail. This is going to not work as we expect, but we'll come back to that in a minute.
All this effort for failed code. I love it.
Exactly. Sometimes it's good to see the failed, That's the joy, right?
Yeah.
So let's get it running.
Let's get it running.
Yep, it's publishing.
So this one is actually taking all the artifacts and pushing it into Azure. We don't have to use the CLI here. We have the Azure function extension inside VS Code that allows you to do all these from the comfort of your VS Codes. Is it an IDE? Some people say it's an IDE. Some people say it's not an IDE. Let's not get into that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a separate discussion.
A whole separate topic.
Cool.
Tabs and spaces, and is VS Code an IDE or no?
Yeah. So let's go back to our function app. Function MSI demo, and I think it should be all published now. It is still deploying. So let me just
still deploying.
Yeah. While that's happening, I might bring up the newer version of the code as well, so we can see.
Exactly. Let's bring that one up so we can discuss what's changed and why people should care about.
Yeah.
It says completed.
Option 1, and this is the newer version. Okay. Sorry, Christos. This is the one which I think we were supposed to be looking at first.
No,
so this is the newer version.
Check this out. How nice and concise that is.
Yeah, this is pretty nice. I like that. It's much nice, and I like this chain token where I don't have to worry about saying, hey, only work with this type. It automatically works with either of those, right? If you have environment credential. Yeah, so I like that part. Absolutely.
Well, the advice from John was like, no, don't use the environment client credential, the environment credential. Like, well, that was in the sample that you sent me, so I copy pasted as every developer will do out there. So don't use environmental deployment, the environmental credentials, because you have to store them somewhere. That means that they're insecure. Hence the reason why John said no. But let's go through this example first, and then we'll go back to the other code and talk a little bit about that.
So that's the function we deployed, right?
Yep.
And if we look at this, we should be able to test it. And if we remember what it's doing, all that is doing is trying to connect using that authentication, and just trying to connect to Blob and put something on the Blob, and that's pretty much what it's doing.
So your customer was actually using this code in one of their solutions, right?
That's correct. So they were trying to use this, and they came back saying, hey, we are having issues. In fact, they were not using this connection string part either. So they were having issues. Then I was like,
because we did discuss about that, right?
Yes, we did. So we did say, you need to add that piece. But then we found some other interesting parts.
That's important. So if you quickly switch back the code, or maybe we can run this one and then go back the code. Let's run this one and go back the code after.
Okay, I will do that. So let's first quickly test this. I'm going to. This is all zoomed out, so it's interesting. And the reason I need to go around the screen is because my Surface laptop, the screen is in between.
Oh, right. There you go.
So here we can see the issue, URI, and this is where we are having all different types of issues. But one of the issues is, you're not able to find storage URI. I just want to make sure we are not, that's correct. So it's not able to access that. It's not able to get the permission to access it.
Right. So it's a bit of a red herring there for the error, but it turns out that the problem was in the connection.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's go back and update it with the version, which I think the fancy version, which Christos, you passed me, and this is the newer version, right?
Correct.
And the only thing which I need to update in this, because I was playing with this and I think I did modify these ones to not use the beta. So it was 2.12. Azure Storage was 12. Do you remember which version was it?
I do not remember, but if you do not use the preview ones, then one of your chained credentials will fail.
Yep.
Because they're not in the right. They're not in the GA version yet. So you need to use the preview.
I'm just going to quickly grab the preview one.
Yep.
Yep, it's 12.5.0 preview. And I think there is a similar preview one for the Azure Identity as well.
Correct. Living on the edge, my friend. This is where it is. I was trying, you can tell I was trying all the different scenarios just to make sure, it's not. So there is a 12.0.6. That's an even newer one than last one. We have a whole new set of Azure SDKs, by the way, for working with Azure, not for managing Azure. So there's the data plane and there's the management plane. It's just very important for people to start using the new Azure SDKs because of all the integration improvements, benefits, latest APIs that come with that. And I will share the link for the SDKs in a second. And you can find them in many places if you want to.
So we got our new function, here right now.
Yep.
It's almost doing the same thing. I think this is the main part here. It gets the credentials and then it connects to the blob.
Yep.
And if something goes wrong, we should see an exception in our function. So
Correct.
Let's go and publish it. So I'm going to go and do the same thing. Hopefully this time it will be quick. Usually this part is really quick. I don't know whether if I'm streaming and that's consuming my bandwidth or what's happening there.
It's the streaming gods, my friend. It's the streaming gods.
Streaming gods. Okay, so let's do this demo and republish this. So deploy to function app. Deploy.
And I've just pasted the information for the latest SDKs for .NET, but we have them for all languages, in fact. So if you ever search for the SDKs and you can't find them, if you search for Azure downloads, it takes you to our page that we have all the tools and SDKs available for your languages or your operating system. And it's a great set of resources there. So let me paste that one as well.
Let's double check it's published. In the meantime, it's publishing. So just. What I like here is you don't even have to provide the connection string. You just say, hey, I want to use this identity, this identity.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't have to say that. It's important though, because as we mentioned earlier on, Azure, the Azure user-defined identities, you can have multiple mapping into a resource. Unlike the system-assigned one, which is one-to-one mapping, the user-assigned ones, you can have many across the resource. So your code needs to know which one to use for what purpose. That's why we need to be explicit about which user identity we want to use.
And that makes perfect sense. I think that makes you explicitly ask, hey, I want to use this one, and you might have different ones for different types of resources or different type of things.
Exactly. You can have one for SQL, and then you can have one for storage, and you can have one for Key Vault. Yeah.
So let me just refresh it, and we should be good.
And I think that was the problem that your customer had. They were not even passing in the older code. They were not passing the app ID into the connection string. Hence, it was failing. And I've come across this one before, and we in fact had to send an update to our docs to say that if you are using a user assigned ID, then the connection string needs to be different for this reason.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's an easy one to miss out sometimes, when you're trying to just, hey, this is not working uh, because I think, as you said, you can have more than one identities assigned as a user assigned identity. So you need to choose which one are you going to use.
Exactly.
Let's have a look. I'm just going to give it a second. Hopefully this should come up pretty quick.
It's warming up.
Yeah, I have very low patience when it tries to. Let's see. Test trigger function. Okay. I think it changed the name as well. That's why, probably. Okay. And if I do this now, and we should hopefully not see an exception. If we do, then that's great. So
Success. Check this out.
That's
and what's the code doing? Change to the code view so people can see what we did and maybe go back to storage. So this one is connecting, and then it creates a new container there. So it says, container. Yep. So your storage account now, so you have a container called Hello World.
So let's go and confirm that, just to make sure. Storage account, and we should see container Hello World, right?
Shaboom.
It probably was created, might be in the last test, but you can trust us, right? It will create again. So.
Well,
but
the code will
we can test this part of the function as well. Create if not exist. So it is doing that work. So that was the joy of function we were having. How are we with time? Do you want to talk about Lighthouse, or is it?
JP, I mean, if you can give us a quick tour in like 2-3 minutes of what Lighthouse is, maybe for people that have never heard about this before and why they should be using it. The high level.
Yeah.
Let's go for it.
And I will give you a view from one of the recent engagements I'm doing. So I'm working with an ISV, and they got thousands of customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And essentially they need to manage environments in thousands of customer subscriptions. So think about it like, they need to deploy VMs, they need to connect, they need to do patching and all those other things. Now, typically what would happen is, if you think about it, you might say, hey, can you add my bunch of users into your Active Directory as a guest users, and then I will start, working, my users will start working on those accounts. And then what happens if one of them leaves, or, other scenarios like that?
Yep.
The other problem we can think about is, hey, I want to manage it from one portal, not go and sign out and sign in again and again, for each of the customers. That could be, again, a pain, right? If you have one customer, two customer, it's okay. As soon as you have multiple of them, it can be a problem.
Yeah.
Or even for enterprises, if you think about enterprises that that have multiple tenancies, right, within enterprise. So to manage them across, this Azure Lighthouse brings it together. So what it does is it provides you, I think one of the key functionality it has is called a delegated access. So essentially what you do is you create a group or a user into your tenant. So this is a Microsoft tenant, right?
Yeah.
And I am the user there, so I could either create a group, or I could have a user myself, and then I could say, hey, whichever my customer is, give this user or this Microsoft tenant permission to this particular subscription or resource group to manage it. So I don't have to leave my portal at all. So what I have done is, and I'll be quick here, I have gone to my MSDN subscription and given it a delegated access saying, hey, this has been managed by my Microsoft account. So if I go to Lighthouse, and if I look at manage your customers, I should see all the accounts I can manage. So I got this access to Contoso. So Contoso is another tenant which I can manage from here.
Very nice.
This is Kunal Babre Office 365. This is my MSDN account, and you can see what all delegations I have given, and I can be granular as a group, resource group, or I could say whole subscription. So I have given multiple delegations because I was playing with this. So I have done delegation for different resource groups, and also given delegation for the whole subscription. I don't have to do whole subscription. It's up to me what I want to give, and to whom it is. So this is what I'm using here. So this is a group within my AD saying, hey, anybody in this group on my Microsoft tenant can actually manage it.
Very nice.
And that means I can browse the customer resources. So this is KB Compute. This is one of my Kubernetes cluster.
Yep.
Christos, I was talking to you about yesterday. You know, this is my Kubernetes cluster into my MSDN subscription, but I can manage it from here. I could in fact create resources in this tenant and everything. So just without leaving my Microsoft account. So this is
Yeah, that's brilliant.
it's pretty good that way. So you can, and this is a quick 2-3 minutes overview. There's a
Yep.
lot more to it. There is things like your update management and policies and all those things. You get a single pane of glass across your customers. So that's definitely, if you've not checked it out, it's a pretty cool functionality. It's out of box available, so you don't have to have, you don't have to be a specific type of, I think, like a CSP or kind of specific type of EA agreement. Anybody can use it. So you could start using delegated accounts. And if you are interested, I will post the sample scripts. Maybe I'll pass it to you, Christos, and you can post it on the channel.
Yeah,
But that's something we can
absolutely.
do. Yeah. So that was a quick overview of it.
Thanks, man. I mean, Azure Lighthouse, where have you been all my life?
Yeah, I think
Definitely.
I think we have a lot of managed service customers, and customers who are deploying resources on behalf of somebody else or managing resources for somebody else, and this just makes it so much easier this way. So
Yes.
that's super cool. I remember one of our buddies, Anton, was spending a ton of time with Lighthouse, and he was really impressed with it. So
Yeah.
really
It's,
cool stuff.
it's great to have it there.
Yep.
And it's really simple. And what I like about it is, it just works out of box. You don't have to do much, kind of configuration. Once you
what you
connect
need.
your subscription, that's it.
That's what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is
I
not.
guess the magic is with some AD as well in the background, right? AD delegations and how that's working.
Yep.
That's an interesting.
Yeah, that it's not dependent on things like EA or CSP or any specific type of like purchasing agreement or partner agreement or anything like that. Like that anyone can use it. I think is that's probably the the happiest part about it for me, because so many of our sort of multi-tenanted tools like that, you have to be a partner, you've got to sign up in a specific way, and it's just not the reality of how people use this stuff every day. So that's super cool.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes into the partner scenario, as you think about, publishing offers on marketplace and things like that. But that's an advanced scenarios if you do want to go there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, Kunal. Thanks, man. We really appreciate you coming and showing us what the customers are dealing with and how we can help them. And if anybody is across the same scenario, then we can definitely help them as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for. And if you've got any sort of, there's a link to like any blog posts or any code or GitHub repos or anything like that you want to share with us, we'll make sure and share them out too.
Absolutely.
Yep, I will do that. I have a blog post. I will share. I will share the Lighthouse one once. I think I need to put a nice sample there, so I'll share that.
All right.
Awesome.
Very cool. Well,
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, guys.
All right, so we got some code a few weeks ago.
We did get some code from
I Am Not Myself.
Yes.
And then we were on vacation. We were here, and it's summertime, and so there's nobody's around. So we finally got some time to take a look at it. So let's take a look.
There you go.
So I pulled the code up yesterday. Went through the instructions in the repo, which we'll make sure to put the repo out there. And what's neat about it is it sort of gives us three different schemes, right? So we've got one scheme for signing in with OpenID Connect, right? So that's what's going on here. And what's interesting
So is this a web app? Is this a function? What is this?
yeah, it's a web app. So it's just a vanilla ASP.NET Core web app. In fact, there are I think it's all single file. Makes it even better. It's just in startup.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Pretty much everything we need is right here, right? So we're starting with our first scheme, and it's important to have this cookie authentication defaults here. Like this here is sort of our default scheme, and auth schemes in .NET are a way to have multiple ways for people to sign in and sort of address them independently, right? So I can sign in with with.
John, are you sharing your screen? I think
Oh,
I'm not seeing anything.
I am sharing it. I'm sharing
I
it.
am seeing it.
I'm sharing it to the internet. I think not in the Teams meeting.
Yeah, you need to be on the Twitch
So
stream.
that would be.
Oh, I see.
I'll share.
Sorry, John.
I'll share it in there too. It's fine. 6 of one, half dozen of the other, right? But so the cookie authentication defaults is one of the schemes, and that's sort of one of the standard ones. That's part of ASP.NET Core. So by using
JP, can you make the font slightly bigger? I'm not myself wants to see his code in a bigger font, and I don't blame him. It's a beautiful code.
okay.
Yeah, it is.
There you go.
So the cookie authentication defaults is part of .NET Core and part of the ASP.NET authentication. And that scheme that's sort of the one we always see used, right? So that's the one that when a user is signed in through some mechanism, be it ASP.NET Identity Membership Database, through OpenID Connect, through something else, we're going to take that and we're going to push it down into this cookie to say, okay, you've signed in to the app, which keeps us from having to constantly go back to the authentication provider, right? Because if we hit a web app and the web app says, hey, we don't know who you are, please go and log in, which is this login string, this login path here, because we don't have a cookie, then we have to sign in somehow. And so the next step of that is we've got to go pick our authentication provider and how we're going to get signed in. But they don't have to be, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same, right? So the fact that we issue a cookie from our app to say, hey, we're signed in, doesn't mean that we only signed into our app with like a username and password in like a membership database, right? We could use all these other different providers. So he's got 3 listed here. So we've got OpenID Connect for Auth0, right? Mm-hmm. And this add OpenID Connect, in fact, when you look at some of the code that we use for Azure AD, it's ultimately calling this under the hood, right? So this is more verbose, of course, because we're not using any special libraries on top of it. But add OpenID Connect, this is sort of the root of where we add our configuration for these things. So, and then there's some configuration that we have to do. Save tokens, get claims from the user info endpoint. This is a difference from Azure AD if you're familiar with Azure AD, in that we have a user info endpoint, but we don't necessarily use it the same way. So you get all your claims in the token directly from us, which sort of obviates the need to go back to user info, but different identity providers use the user info endpoint, which is pretty much just saying, hey, send this token back to an info endpoint, to a user info endpoint, which is outlined in the OpenID spec to get extra claims. And of course, the ASP.NET Core OpenID Connect helper handles that for us. But then the rest of the configuration should be pretty familiar. So we've got a client ID, we've got a client secret, we've got where we want the user sent back afterward, we've got our authority and our response type. And then we're mapping 2 of these claims here, name and email, which is cool. So now we're saying, hey, the ASP.NET claim called name, which is actually this schemas.xml soap, blah, 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 map the incoming claim called name into that one, and the same with email, because of course email and ASP.NET Core and that sort of claim namespace is going to be this, right? So we're mapping those 2, and then configuring the scopes that we're going to use for that authentication request. Now, we haven't made the authentication request yet. We're just making the scheme available, right? So we're saying, hey, this is one of the schemes we're going to have that we can use for this. And then we have 2 more at the bottom, which we'll kind of get through those here in a minute. Well, I guess we'll go and look at them now. So we have these two. We're adding 2 OAuth providers. So one's GitHub and one's Twitch. And of course, each one has different things that you can do. These two events, these on ticket create or on ticket received and on creating ticket. These 2 events are interesting. There are similar events in OpenID Connect, right? So if you wanted to manipulate the claims, for example, if you wanted to add your own claims or add different ones, there are different events that you can hook into sort of as an opportunity to do that. My question, and so on the surface and sort of like as a this works, right? So we've got one authentication scheme here. So this is going to authenticate us. And then we have these two OAuth schemes here, which will go and fetch us tokens for this. And if I run it, then we should see it work because I added all of the requisite keys to config earlier today. So I'm going to run this, and we should see it work. Make sure I get a browser open that's actually got me signed into the right places. Let's see here. Maybe this one? I don't know. Who knows? I don't even know who I'm signed in with anymore in what browser. Too many browser profiles. I'll try this one. Here we go. All right. So over here, let's go to localhost 5001. So we're up and we're running. Localhost 5001. And here is our app, right? In fact, it's got my old stuff from earlier. So let me go clear my cookies for this one. And make sure we have no data here. I guess I could do it privately too, but then I'll have to sign into GitHub, and nobody wants to watch me do all that. So we'll clear this data out. Give this a refresh. We shouldn't have anything. Okay, cool. So now we're going to choose an auth scheme. So we have three. We've got our OpenID Connect one, which is connected to Auth0. We've got GitHub for OAuth. We've got Twitch for OAuth.
Right.
And what's interesting about the differences here is like OpenID Connect is a superset of OAuth 2, right? So we've got OAuth 2, which handles purely authorization. It's just a way for me to say, I want to do something on your behalf in another service.
Right.
It's not technically doesn't tell you who the user is. I mean, I guess it could, but it's not required to, right? It's required to give you an access token that has the scopes that you selected or the scopes that you chose, right? So, yeah, that's a good idea. I need to make sure I need to not have my refresh tokens up here. I need to figure out a way to do just one little blur and one little blur of my screen. So first, I'm going to do OpenID Connect. And so OpenID Connect is going to sign me in, right? Which I'm already signed in. Make sure there's I shouldn't have a refresh token here, I don't think, because I didn't request offline access. I don't have one. Okay, good. So I'm signed into my Auth0 tenant, right? And I already signed into this browser, so I didn't have to go through and actually re-sign in. SSO handled it because I was already signed in from earlier. But we've got our claims, right? So we got our claims. These come out of the ID token, things like nickname and name and my avatar. Which this is interesting. I don't even remember ever setting up a Gravatar, so I have no idea what my Gravatar is. So I'm kind of curious to go see what it looks like now. And it's the prison photo I took on campus a few years ago. So. And then
I wanted to ask about the story for this picture, but maybe for another stream.
No, so I went to campus with my boss. I don't remember why. We were there for one reason or another. And since I live in North Carolina, I don't go to campus or didn't go to campus but once every few weeks. And the visitor center had been redone, and it had this LinkedIn photo booth. And like LinkedIn to me is one of those things that's just like, I know a lot of people like it, but it's just tedious to flip through and read, right? And it said, get your professional headshot taken for your
I think it was a trick.
For your LinkedIn profile. So yeah, it was probably some sort of like face recognition thing. But so I went.
Was that the big round light? Because I went to a Redmond campus. Was it in early March or end of February? And they had this LinkedIn booth there, which was pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's the one that I used, and so I kind of wasn't really paying attention, and I got a little shocked because I think it blinked the flash more than once, and so I was like, okay, I'm done. And so I ended up with this not terribly flattering photo, but it was like, do you want to send this to LinkedIn? And I was like, well, obviously, I'm in the LinkedIn photo booth. What else am I going to do with it? And so that ended up being my LinkedIn photo it might still be. I don't know. I haven't been to LinkedIn in quite a while. Anyway, so that's cool that my Gravatar comes in. I've obviously linked it to this email address. But so we've got our claims here, right? And what's neat is you'll notice the name claim, the email address claims. These are using the ASP.NET names, right? These fully qualified sort of. I don't want to call them legacy names, but they're definitely sort of older names, right? That came out of the claim types. And what's also interesting is it looks like we have them twice, which leads me to believe that potentially we don't actually have to do that mapping to map these JSON keys from name and email. At least in the version of the code that I'm in, like the version of the OpenID Connect and ASP.NET Identity code that we're in, we may not even have to do it because it looks like name was not mapped, but it looks like email address maybe was.
Right.
So name was our own mapping that was in our code. Email address was not. So now I'm signed in, right? So I've signed into the application in the sense that, and I've got a claims principal, right, with user data, and we've got an access token, which I'll have to go and maybe we should just put our stream on a 1 hour delay. Somebody could use my access token. So at this point, though, I haven't signed into GitHub and I haven't signed into Twitch. So while I'm signed into the application, I can't do anything with those external services, right? And I think one of the questions was around, or one of the reasons for this was that we have a lot of apps now that don't do any. They don't do any anything with like their own data. They don't really hold or own any data. They manipulate other services, right? And sometimes that's to build a whole new sort of business pipeline or a whole new way of looking at business data or manipulating business data or whatever. Sometimes it's for like automation, things like IFTTT, if this then that, and Microsoft Flow or Power, whatever it's called now, and Power Automate, Logic Apps. It's a way for us to say we've got all this data in 48 disparate services and we want to go, plug all the different ones together. So at this point, I have a cookie, and that cookie should be, let's go look at it. That cookie should be just a regular, straight up, unexciting ASP.NET Identity cookie. So let's go see what we got.
Why unexciting, JP? Come on, don't be.
It's unexciting because it's good to be unexciting in identity software because that means that it works. So we've got our cookies. Of course, we can't see any data in here, but I cleared these beforehand. So we've got our cookies, and these have the bits of data that we need, or that ASP.NET Core needs to know who we are through a refresh of the page. So I should be able to refresh the page and not go hit the identity system again, and all my claims, by virtue of them being printed on the screen, are coming out of the claims collection of the user, right?
Very nice.
So I don't have to go back to the identity provider, which is great. We're just using the cookie data that's in there. So the next thing we need to do is we want to go connect to something like a GitHub, right? And so I've done a connection to GitHub. Here's an access token to GitHub, which I think can only read my email address, so I don't really mind if anybody goes and does that. But what's interesting is we've sort of wiped out our prior authorization or our prior authentication data. So my ID token is essentially gone.
Right.
Because we're adding OAuth as a separate scheme, our scheme data from our original one
gets overwritten.
Well, I guess overwritten is the right word. It essentially is booting that identity out, and I think ideally we'd like to do is maybe stack these identities on top of each other.
Yes. Cumulative token acquisition, where you authenticate, then you also authorize to go and speak to GitHub or Twitter, and when your application needs to use it on a different page, you don't have to do it again, right?
Right.
Or maybe you do it on the page that you need to see the data, so you don't have to do all the authentication up front. I think that will be a better practice for us, or for the solution.
So I think that's the key is when we say, like, because this is I think this is pretty common. This is a pretty common pattern, right? Which is I'm going to sign in with one provider, but I need to connect or link to other providers to go do work, right? And it's not always the same provider, right? If you're doing work, in like Office, where you can sign in a user and get graph tokens or whatever all at the same place. But if you're signing in a user one way,
Yep.
and then subsequently authorizing services for that user or on behalf of that user, then
Yep.
we need a way to sort of store all this together. And I'm tempted to say,
Mm-hmm.
I'm tempted to say that, I'm tempted to say that maybe we enumerate the collection of schemes,
Right.
and then take a look at each one of the schemes, and in each one of these, so like on creating ticket, for example, or let's see, what's the event name? On, let's see. Maybe it's on ticket received. I'll have to look and see which one we think would be the best point to do this. But I'm wondering if at that point we would so we've got this principal.
Yep.
I wonder if we could at this point take the principal and add the identity of the other. Well, but our principal at that point may have already been created. So, on... Yeah,
Right.
I'm not sure which event, at which point we will still have access to the prior principal. So I'm thinking,
Yeah.
so you have this concept of identities, right? I'm wondering if we can stack each of these identities together and then bundle them up into one principal, right? So we got this principal concept. We want to have a principal that has multiple identities on
Multiple
top of
identities.
it.
Yep.
And so,
I think that's something that we need to experiment and test with to see whether that's possible, right?
yeah, so if you look at the OpenID Connect events, there's on security, or was it on token validated or something like that? Yeah, on token validated. And on token validated, this is where we would do that.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's exactly it, is that add OAuth and add OpenID Connect are assuming that there's a sort of an isolated identity that comes from each one of these. And in reality, we want to get an identity from each one of them that we add to an overall principal, because the principal is the sort of one-to-one mapping of a user or the principal, I guess.
Yeah, so
Between
I'm
the-
not myself is saying, I think the issue here is that these methods assume that we're getting an identity from each provider, but this is not the intention.
Right. So ultimately, I think kind of what we want is something like this. We want a principal, which is one-to-one for a user interacting with the app. But then
Yep.
underneath that, we want to have identity one, which is our, we'll just say it's our OpenID Connect one, our Auth0 one. And all an identity really is in this sort of context is really just an IEnumerable of claims, right?
Yeah.
And then we want to have identity 2 be OAuth2 from GitHub,
Yep.
which is really just another IEnumerable of claims, and the only claim here
Yep.
is the access token. And then
Yep.
identity 3 is Twitch. And I think that it's sort of calling it an identity probably isn't really semantically correct either, because
Yeah.
it's not really an identity. It's really just an access token and a refresh token.
Yeah.
So I think that what we'll end up with is we'll sort of flesh out that construct with the identity and principal relationship in ASP.NET Core.
Yeah.
And so I think I think that's how I would approach it. And maybe this is something we can do on Tuesday, is actually build this out in total to say, I've got my principal.
Mm-hmm.
My principal has a collection of identities underneath it, and one of them is the one that we're using sort of with our main cookie scheme to say we're signed in. But then instead of these being separate principals, which is what's happening right now, is this is creating a principal. This is creating a principal. And this,
Which they bump each other out. So in effect, you end up just with a single principle that is specific to the latest authentication you just achieved.
yeah, it's
Take-
Is
on.
there a way to say this is only for authorization or something? Because it's not everybody is used as a authentication in that context.
right. And OAuth 2 isn't technically for authentication, right? I mean, it's not really made for authentication per se, to say you don't technically know anything about the user. All you have is a token you can use that has certain permissions based on what the identity provider told you, or certain scopes.
Yep.
So I think in the context of ASP.NET, with this sort of attitude around principles and everything else, I think that's where we would. That to me is probably the most straightforward way to make sure that the claim data gets wrapped into the cookie, which ultimately is the principal, and gets written back in every subsequent request. Now, the other side to that might be, do we want access tokens and refresh tokens being written to cookies? I mean, granted, the cookies are encrypted, but do we really want that written back to the user's box? And should we store those off somewhere? And I don't know, though. I'm a little curious about the schemes as to whether or not these other schemes are available, because this scheme will have still been here, and if we catch the right event before a net new cookie is written, if we catch the event, we should be able to grab the other identities and stuff them in there from the other principal before that cookie's written, and just sort of stack them on top of each other.
Right.
But I'm also wondering if that was accounted for, because when we do have named schemes, right? So you would think that with named schemes, you'd have the ability to switch between them, or at least the ability to inspect each one of them independently and not have them override each other. Like, yeah, if they were all using the same one, sure. But if you're using different schemes, you should be able to toggle between them. And when I've used schemes in the past, like separate schemes, it's for like multiple instances of AD, like an AD and a B2C.
Mm-hmm.
But they're so common in terms of what they send back that I never got to a point where I was missing that extra data. So I'm going to spend some time on it, and maybe Tuesday maybe Tuesday we dig into it and
Well, on
figure it
Tuesday
out.
we have our podcast recording.
Oh, that's true.
To announce that. Yeah, we got Simon Brown, who's a leading expert in software architecture. He's going to speak to us about architecture, software, cloud, security, and how they all fit together in the modern cloud era. And we may have some time after the podcast recording to actually do this, because we will be doing the podcast on the stream, which is a new approach for us. And you'll be able to see Simon, and you'll hear him. So if you don't like the just audio medium, you can actually catch the stream. But if you like to listen to podcasts on your way to work or shopping or whatever, then it will be also made available as a podcast. But that's only for an hour. So usually we stream for 3 hours. That means that leaves us 2 hours to go and do some fun stuff. Maybe the fun stuff is this one.
Okay, so that's what we're going to do then. So Tuesday Tuesday morning we're going to talk to Simon. And then we're gonna figure out a way to use ASP.NET without having to build anything on our own, right? Like, I don't want to have to go build a database and a whole set of services just for storing these extra tokens. Like, I think we can make it work with what we've got. I just need to do a little bit of research first, especially on swapping between authentication schemes, and if you're allowed to have more than one at one time, even though it's not really an authentication, it's an authorization. But if we're going to muddy it enough to say we're going to add OpenID Connect and add OAuth, and then these are going to get flattened, if I could see if these were different, like if I could keep my GitHub OAuth without flattening my OpenID Auth0 one here.
Yep.
So I'm a little surprised that it did flatten it because these are separate, but I'm gonna take a look, and by Tuesday afternoon, or by Tuesday at an hour in, we should have we should at least we'll go find some answers together. How about that?
Yeah, we'll find the answers together, and I think we might even reach to Barry Dorrance, who is, the expert in security in the .NET framework, just to understand whether in .NET Core this is something that is supported by the framework, because we want the framework to support that. We don't want us to go and write some custom code to deal with it. I mean, if we have to, we will do it. But it would be nice to see whether this kind of an edge case, or not as edge case as I'm thinking here, is something that is supported by the framework, but we haven't really tested that and it works. So you know what? We'll catch up with Amro myself this afternoon. We might even bring him on the show on Tuesday to code with us and help us out and understand better what he's trying to do here. And we will see you all next week, I think. I don't have anything else.
Oh, the thing that I learned is we're supposed to get raid a channel afterward, right? That's what everybody told us to do.
Yes, we need to raid the channel. Let's find who we should raid.
Well, so Layla is the only one live that we're following right now. So I guess we'll go over there.
Yeah, let's go over there.
We're going to go over, I guess we'll take everybody with us over to Layla. We will be back on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We're going to all go over to Layla's channel. She was with us yesterday. We were helping, working with her on some B2C stuff in Blazor, so make sure you check that video out. And we'll see everybody on Tuesday. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Oh, wait a minute. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm waiting.
You need to go into settings, and then there's like a raid option. Ah.
Oh, hello. Welcome, Raiders.
We didn't bring that many with us, but...
You just missed
I
me
did say
cuddling
small
the
party.
small dog and her, like, destroying my desk.
Pico party.
And licking the mic. You missed the
Yeah,
up
Pico
close
party.
personal slurping noises.
Microservice. Micro party.
So how are you all?
How
Double
about that?
raid, what
Hey,
does
let's
it
switch back to
mean?
Teams, man.
Okay, hey,
Hey,
Kunal, thank you,
We've
sir.
come to a really fun part. I'm stuck.